Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link and in association with Liberty Source. Today we're going to be looking at a very new and exciting of outsourcing, and in particular looking at the AOL story. So we're going to be digging into how AOL reshored finance with an innovative BPO model. My name is Susie West and I am your host today. I am the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link, and I'm very excited to be presenting two great speakers. We are being joined today by Richard Ziller, who's the Director Account Services at AOL, and Stephen Housley, who is the CEO at Liberty Source. So great to have these gentlemen with us today sharing their story. You, of course, have a key role to play insofar as what you get out of the next 60 minutes, which is really to make sure that you have your key questions answered. So post your questions through to me in the GoToWebinar box highlighted here, and make sure you post those through to me nice and early, and I will put those questions to our guest speakers in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. So let's have a look at why we're actually having this webinar today, what really inspired this webinar. It's really based on a few things. I think, as many of us are aware, growth continues within the BPO market. It's not so much double-digit growth that we were seeing a good kind of 10 years ago, or even really 5 years ago, but we are seeing strong single-digit growth. And then you start looking at other factors that are happening in the shared services world and in the world generally. There's an appetite after kind of a good 15 years really of offshoring. There's an appetite for a lot of organizations to seriously consider reshoring processes for various reasons, and companies have their own drivers, but there does seem to be an appetite for reshoring what were previously offshored activities. And then another kind of movement, and all these threads will kind of begin to converge shortly. Another movement is that there is an increasing awareness within corporations of their social responsibilities. So corporate social responsibility, SCR, there's an awareness around CSR, beg your pardon, CSR, that maybe wasn't as strong kind of 5-10 years ago, and there's a much more kind of stronger focus on what these obligations are for organizations. So you start weaving together these three threads, and it really inspired a few individuals to look at these factors and think about what would the opportunity here. And really something that emerged was very exciting, and what was emerged was an organization called Liberty Source. And what we're going to be doing today is telling you a little bit about Liberty Source, and just to give you a high-level overview, it's an outsourced organization which employs military spouses and military veterans, and it's onshore. And they've had a great deal of success within their first 12-14 months of operation, winning a number of clients and household names. And what we're going to be doing during this webinar is looking at the journey that they've taken with one of their first clients, AOL. So just before I hand over to Rich Ziller, who is our first speaker, I'd just like to launch our first poll question, which will be coming up on your screen very shortly indeed. So we've got that coming up on your screen now, ladies and gentlemen. So if you could answer this poll question for me. Are you considering bringing outsourced activities back onshore? We have not outsourced, so not really relevant for us as yet. We have outsourced, but only recently, and our contract is 5 years, so it's a little premature for us to be thinking about that. We have outsourced, and we're looking to bring operations back onshore. We have outsourced, but we are happy keeping our operations offshore for now. So if I can ask all of you please to participate. We're at 45% participation. We do like to get up to about 70% participation if at all possible. So are you considering bringing outsourced activities back onshore? We have not outsourced, so not relevant. We have outsourced, but only recently. We have outsourced and are looking to bring operations back onshore. Or the option 4, we have outsourced and are happy keeping our ops offshore for now. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, and if we can have a look at those results coming up on the screen now. So just shy of half of you have not actually outsourced as yet, so not necessarily a relevant question for you. 6% of you have engaged only recently in a BPO contract, so the question's a little premature for you. 19% of you are looking to potentially bring operations back onshore, so a fifth of the group represented here, and 31% of you are outsourced currently, and you are happy keeping your operations offshore for now. So thank you for those results. Okay, I would now like to hand over to our first guest speaker, please. So over to you, please, Rich Siller.
Thanks, Susie, and a warm welcome to everybody on the phone. If we take a look at our agenda page here, we're really going to walk through the AOL journey and how we partnered with LibertySource to make that onshore opportunity happen. So I'll start with a little bit about the business of AOL, bring everybody up to speed on where our company is. We'll also take a look at shared services and BPO and what we're really calling shared services here. We'll go through just kind of defining what those functions are. And then a fork in the road, really the question around how can we bring this work back onshore? Does it make sense? Is it financially feasible? We'll talk about why we chose LibertySource to do that, and then some of the operation stuff, transition, how we made that happen, what functions went over, came back here, and how that happened, and then finally where we are and what's next in our relationship with LibertySource. Then I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and he's going to talk a little bit about LibertySource and their BPO model. So an overview of the company and the genesis for the model, how they built that, its value proposition, and how LibertySource really competes and partners, so competes with other firms and partners, their differentiators, their partnerships with a company like AOL, and what the future looks like in terms of how they're building that company. And then finally, we'll close and have a Q&A session. So let's give an update on the AOL business. We are officially 30 years old. I don't know how many people know that AOL is not just the dial-up company we used to be, but let's walk through our timeline. So back in 1985, we started the company, and it was known as Quantum Computer, and it was really just an early entry into dial-up internet service provider market. And as we went through the years and grew that business and became really a household name when we renamed ourselves to America Online. By about 96, we had about 5 million members, and we continued to grow. We got into the whole social part of the internet with buddy lists, chatting, AIM. We were really the innovators there. And in 2001, we did merge with Time Warner, and I don't know if everybody knows about that. I think that may have been the largest acquisition ever, which wasn't completely successful, but it happened. And you can see really an inflection point there. By 2004, we started to move slightly away from the internet dial-up service provider business, which was making lots of money, and we started looking at advertising technology. So just for those on the phone that don't really know what that means, if you think about a web page or a YouTube video or something on your mobile phone, it's those advertisements that come up, banner ads, things like that. So our company and our technology serve those ads up, and we monetize with our customers. We monetize the value of those ads, whether they're through click-throughs or different actions within the ad. So again, it's mobile, it's online display ads, it's part of the video process. By about 2010, we are fully free on the internet service dial-up piece, and we have completely changed the business model into a strong advertising technology business. We're heavily investing in ad technology, and then by 2011, we purchased Huffington Post and really got into a content play there. And then finally, where we are today, in June, purchased by or acquired by Verizon, and we can talk about what that means. But just fully international, strong global presence, access to millions and millions of consumers, and also with the Microsoft deal, the strongest player really in advertising technology. So we're no longer your dial-up company. We are truly a disruptive ad tech company. And then just looking in more detail at the last year, I just wanted to show how the consumer base has changed with the addition of both the Microsoft business that we're now doing as well as the Verizon business, growing from 150 million consumers or customers all the way up to 700. And that not only gives us the scale to reach these customers, but also gives us a real global presence all over the world in terms of advertising technology. So now a little bit about our shared services. And we saw the journey that we took through the corporate side and how our business has changed and technology has changed. And this really drove the architecture of how we built our shared services way back in 2004 to be receptive and really active for how the business changes. We needed to do that on the shared service side. And so you can see in 2004 we created a consolidated shared service here in Dulles, Virginia. And in 2005 we implemented a global SAP presence, so all our financials were done through SAP. And it was an interesting pursuit. We actually set up at that time the real business case for outsourcing. It was for speed to transformation through a BPO. We needed somebody, a provider that had immediate SAP knowledge. We really needed someone strong in that area. And the way we built our teams was we left the controls, customer service, really front-end piece here in Dulles, and then moved that transaction work to our provider in India. And from just a quick thought on that, we really had two different types of outsourced, or excuse me, offshore providers. One is a traditional BPO outsource relationship, and we also built a captive center in India that was full, FTEs that were an AOL office there. Some of the other things we got out of it: strong vendor management skills. We built a governance team. We started really looking at how the metrics and measurement, SLAs, came into play, and standardized and industrialized all our processes, and eventually did so well on the BPO side that we even rolled our offshore captive center directly into the BPO. So that went lockstep with supporting the business, and you can see that went all the way through our growth mode and where we are today. Around 2012, we began to take a look at the reasons that we offshored and outsourced to our BPO, and started to explore options around how could we bring that work back here. Some of the things that we were seeing that we wanted to really solve for in our existing relationship is that, well, initially the time zone differences were helpful. They weren't really giving us everything we needed. The costs were continuing to increase in the India outsourced market. We saw a huge turnover and then subsequently retraining needs. And finally, the quality of what we were getting and what we were paying. So we set up a series of goals to look at how to reshore this. And we decided we wanted to find a local provider, same time zone. We wanted a relationship with a new partner locally that was cost neutral. We didn't want to pay any more than we were currently paying. And we knew that we had access to a strong labor force here in the United States, so that was a goal and a bonus we needed to affect. And then finally, we wanted an organization that knew how to innovate. That was one of the things that we were starting to see slip in our current provider. And as a bonus, AOL is very socially aware and supportive of military families. So we wanted a company that also met our CSR, our corporate social responsibility, specifically around military spouses. We knew that was an untapped market here in the States, and we decided that we wanted to line that up with our other goals. We had two options. We could either bring that work back and look for an existing outsourcing provider or set up a AOL captive center. Ultimately, we decided on option one, and we partnered with LiveResource to outsource that work. I'll quickly go of what went over to LiveResource. Really around three different domains. So in purchase to pay or procure to pay, we have master data, that's customer, vendor, and employee data within SAP. We have our travel and expense P-card functions, all purchasing and all accounts payable. In order to cash, that's really around advertising and paid services subscription revenue. We have a deal management function, which is like a contract review. We have all our performance reporting, which is reporting third-party, internal, around delivered value for how ads are acting and what the performance is. We have advertising, billing, and invoicing, cash applications, and reconciliation against lockbox within SAP, and then also collections and credit functions. And then finally, in record to report is the more traditional accounting work, expense, fixed assets, revenue accounting, all our international accounting and consolidations, and also that membership or paid services accounting. All surrounded by a series of platforms, SAP, Salesforce, Zendesk for Help Desk, Hyperion for consolidation, budgeting, forecasting, and Concur for T&E. A quick look at transition and the plan we did. Ultimately, we struck the deal in June of 2014, and LiveResource acquired the property down in Hampton, Virginia, where they currently are, by August. And really within 120 days, we performed the kickoff training in September, our first go live in October of one process, and then finally all processes live by January of 2015. A couple of notes. You saw 120 days from training to go live. The way we phased our migration was by function, and we grouped functions into 5 different areas. And LiveResource hired the seniors staff and then allowed the seniors and also the other leaders to hire the line staff. We took a look at our complexity by function, and we allowed extra training and also cross-training for some of the more complex areas such as accounting and some of our billing and reporting. And we also needed to be mindful of year-end, so we wanted to make sure that we had cross-training to support year-end. Again, on cross-training, we did a series of different things. We worked heavily with our incumbent BPO via video conferencing. There actually was no travel to or from India, which was great on a cost perspective. And then from a training perspective with us and our LiveResource partner, we were very involved, attached at the hip, and we had training both in Hampton and also up here in Dulles, Virginia. Now we can look at the transition timeline in more detail. It was really a 3 to 5 month transition plan, and as you can see, as I said, we grouped our functions really into 5 groups and started with master data. Although a real foundational function, we felt that that was the least risk to rolling. You may wonder why we actually rolled so quickly. One thing is we wanted to mitigate risk of our incumbent BPO losing focus and really stepping away from the partnership, so we had to do this in a relatively short time frame. And if we look at just the various functions, right, we've got some of the labor staffing in the light blue, extending those offers to seniors and staff. We had a documentation knowledge transfer period and some prep for training, and then a parallel production. So a note on that, we worked in parallel with all 3 groups, so our incumbent BPO, LiveResource, and AOL, and we did it in a couple different ways. But for instance, we would have a shared work queue where all 3 groups could draw transaction work from the same queue. Eventually, over time, the incumbent BPO did less and less work, and LiveResource picked up more and more of that work until they fully owned it. Finally, we had a stabilization period and then a go live. And a note about excuse me, the organization. For transition specifically, we wanted to take an approach of two in a box, we called it. So not only from a process perspective and that knowledge and training perspective, we obviously had an AOL and a LiveResource lead for each of those process areas. That really helped in training, that helped in responsibility and ownership. Then also on more of the administrative or governance functions of the transition, we once again had both AOL and LiveResource joined at the hip in every one of those functions, all the way up to the steering committee. And this was really done intentionally to make sure that there was buy-off from both the AOL side as well as the pickup and the ownership on the LiveResource team. And at this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Susie for the second poll question.
That's great, Rich. So coming up on your screen is the second poll question for the day, which is examining to what extent does your sourcing process value a connection to CSR? Please tick the appropriate box. It has never really been a consideration, and I doubt this will change. It has not as yet been a consideration, but I feel that this is changing within the organisation. CSR has always been a small part of our sourcing process. CSR has always been a major part of our sourcing process, and we are considering CSR in our outsourcing more than we used to, or sorry, more than in our sourcing more than we used to. So please do tick the box. We're only at 30% of you responding. We do like to see if we can get that number up a little bit higher, more towards certainly across the 50% mark. So does your sourcing process value a connection to CSR today? And you've got the 5 options there, please. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen now. So the kind of the standout winner there is the 43% of you saying that it has not been a consideration in the past, but we feel that this is changing. And then really a joint second position by the 4 other areas. So good to see that there's a general mood towards a change within that area. Now I'd like to hand the narrative over to Steve, please.
Thanks, Susie. Good morning and good afternoon to folks on the phone. Like Susie said, LiveResources, just a quick introduction. We started LiveResource in 2013. I started on the journey with my team in the quest to kind of build something different. And the story of AOL kind of begins to demonstrate elements of that difference. So like many folks on the phone this morning, I've been in the BPO space for many, many years as either a provider, an advisor, or even a consumer. So felt like this was a perfect opportunity to create something different. The market was ready for it. So where are we now with the AOL account? We're at the performance level, just like many typical offshore BPO providers. We measure a lot of things for AOL across their 16 areas. We're 97% green. The pace is quickened. I would say that maybe folks in other companies might feel that same pace. I mean, with the Verizon acquisition, the amount of pressures put upon the AOL finance team has only exponentially grown. So the pace is quickened. We can see it in our customers and the way when we interact with the AOLers every day. Performance level, we know that bringing the work back home really translates into not just getting green, but going beyond green. And that's the expectation of AOL and other customers we have. And so just getting green, I think in the BPO space, some people refer to it as watermelons, where you have greens, but it's red on the inside. We aim to, surpass the greens on the SLA and move beyond that. Innovation, we've shown signs of innovation in target areas where we're delivering over and above the kind of the SLAs and just reports or insightful analysis that we bring to the AOLers to help make decisions. I think our team has begun to grown an awareness of what the needs and wants of the client is. I think, like Rich said, we set this up as a very collaborative approach, and so the AOLers deal directly with the delivery team at Liberty Source, and that begins to yield dividends over time, because the Liberty Source team can kind of, in essence, to quote one of the members at AOL, make sure that the Liberty Source guys have our back and understand what their needs and wants are. From a talent point of view, we experienced some initial attrition, but that's leveled off, and now we're in the single-digit approach, and we've changed we've modified our talent acquisition approach. Operations is we are certain areas are starting to work remotely, so that's flexibility, and the workforce really enjoys that flexibility. And we're shifting, I think, in the early stages of working with AOL, it was really all how. So AOL with Liberty Source working on how the work was getting done. Now the discussion is shifting more towards kind of outcomes and what's, and they're relying on Liberty Source knowing how. What's next? Like I mentioned, going beyond green, performance across all areas. We have pockets of beyond green. We need to move that into other areas. I mean, 16 different process areas, and they're all different evolutions of maturity. Outcome-based, so you'll see that Liberty Source definitely subscribes to kind of an end game of business process as a service. So helping, let's mature the processes, innovate the processes, and really convert contractually to an outcome-based model. And then RPA. We didn't really have the time, given some of the time constraints of the AOL contract, but in our new engagements, we deploy RPA on the front end to help automate some of the work up front before we actually ring fence it for BPO. System agnostic solutions, over time, we hope to bring more SaaS solutions to. We're agnostic to SaaS providers, and we work with a number of them, and we want to provide them to AOL as different solution sets. And then lastly, you'll learn a little bit about our footprint today is housed in one area of, we started in Virginia, but we're soon growing to other sites around the world. And I'd like to, at this point, hand it back to Susie for another poll question, I believe.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So third poll question coming up on your screen now, please. If you could tell us a little bit about how you would rate the closeness of your relationship with your BPO provider today. So for those of you where this question is relevant, please tick the appropriate box. Very close, close, medium close, or perhaps it's a distant relationship, or something else that we haven't actually managed to describe for you here. So for those of you outsourcing today, how would you rate the closeness of your relationship with your BPO today? Very close, close, medium, distant, or other? If you haven't already responded, please do so. Closing the poll. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, and the results coming up on your screen now. So relatively positive results here, with 15% of you saying very close, just shy of 40% of you saying close. So that really is over 50% of you suggesting that there's a strong relationship, close relationship between yourselves and your outsourcer. Just shy of 40% of you saying medium, and 8% of you saying other. Interesting results. Back to you, please, Stephen.
Great, thanks, Susie. So, like I said, we started on the journey at Liberty Source back in 2013, and then flipped the switch in 2014 and formally established the company. At that point, we had all kind of laid out all the groundwork of what we were going to build, and so our first location that we selected is the largest consolidation of military personnel in the world. So it's located next to the largest Navy base in the world, and then a number of other locations. We looked at the profile of U.S. military bases, and we've laid out a map of where this model would work across different geographies. This was, of course, a good starting place, and also closely located to our first customer, AOL. We're set up as a typical BPO operation centered on finance and accounting, and soon to be will grow into other areas in the HRO space as well. RPA is definitely part of the solution stack as well. You'll see that we formulated ourselves. This is kind of maybe the innovative BPO mention that Susie mentioned. We're a public benefit corporation, which is kind of a new delineation, or relatively new delineation. So we are for profit, but when I have to answer to our board, I speak in terms of commercial terms, but of profitability and pipeline and things like that. But I also have to speak to them about what we're doing for the population of spouses and veterans, because it's in our articles of incorporation. So we believe that make a sustainable impact socially, it should be a sustainable enterprise, a sustainable commercial enterprise that also does great commercial work, but also does it in a socially minded manner, and we call it hardwiring towards serving this community. The impetus, like I said, like Susie kind of outlined in the beginning, we just in essence connected a few dots, and so large BPO market, bit of a drumbeat of domestic centers. Just over in the past 5 years, the number of domestic centers are increasing. There is a certain amount of fatigue in some of the older BPO contracts, at least according to some of the analysts out there. And then there's this large, untapped, underemployed population of military spouses, 1.1 million to be somewhat precise. And they're more educated than the typical civilian workforce, and they're underemployed. The reason they're underemployed is because they get moved around quite a bit following their service member. So very difficult getting jobs. But very employable if you look past that the mobility factor. And then you add that all up. If you look at the Fortune 100, over 50% of them have some affiliation to helping military families. So if you have a market that is leaning towards a kind of a CSR element of helping military families, we just simply connected the dots. So first and foremost, in building Liberty Source, we do believe that the BPO market over the last 20 years has been highly industrialized, and that's been amazing, that transformation that's happened offshore. These processes have been never more industrialized than they are today. What we want to do at Liberty Source, and have built ourselves around, is really kind of build that human capital layer back in to that industrialized model, business model. So we do lead with our human capital. We're proud of our people. So this commercial mission, being flexible BPO provider, open and responsive, transparent, and then also the social mission that I spoke about hiring spouses and veterans and doing the right thing, basically running a commercial enterprise with a social compass. In building the values and operating principles, once again, a lot of BPO operations maybe don't totally lead with their human capital, but we do believe that who we have working for us really is kind of what we're all about. That ends up becoming our differentiator. So in building our values and operating principles, you'll see elements that very much came from industrialized offshore type of environments, knowing your numbers, operational excellence. But then you'll see elements around that come from the military, selfless service, own it, okay? And so it's really a blending of two cultures and values, and it really comes up with this unique human capital model that we've built at Liberty Source. And just a side note, we refer to all of our employees as shipmates, and so it's definitely part of the nomenclature that we run ourselves with every day. From a market differentiation point of view, when you look at the human capital that we employ, it actually translates very nicely into commercial differentiation, as evident in this stack here. And so, from a talent point of view, we're entrenched in kind of military communities and through various different mechanisms, but it allows us to kind of fill roles quickly. We've reached a 72% direct military affiliation, so they're either 72% of our population is either a spouse or a veteran, and it translates into kind of a low attrition rate. So we've represented, I think, attrition is sometimes hurt some of the offshore providers, and so we've found that hiring from this population, the attrition rate is a pretty dedicated community that has a low attrition rate, which translates into benefits to our customers. On a training point of view, we've developed a kind of a bridge to proficiency from maybe some of their military experiences into what we call commercial proficiency. We've learned kind of where some of the blind spots are, where some of the strengths are, and built the program around that. Transactions. So we're working with our customers. We have a number of different what we call on-ramps into working with us. So there's, we sometimes work on smaller scope. We sometimes work on maybe industry-specific scope. Transparency, I think Rich mentioned it a few times, two in a box. AOL and our other customers have full direct access to their delivery teams. So they know who they are, they know their names, and so we're proud of our workforce, and our customers have complete access to them. So, so flat organization, not a lot of handlers between our delivery operation and the customer. Transformation. I've mentioned it before. We plan on going beyond green. We've shown signs of that early on with AOL. We still have a ways to go in certain areas, but that's our mission is to go beyond the green SLAs. And then we think of social mission as just the way we operate, but it's almost a tiebreaker for CS. If you add up to all those differentiators, we believe it kind of lays in nicely into what we call a unique delivery platform, those differentiators. So if you layer in the service excellence layer that kind of is a must-have in the BPO space, like quality and metrics and customer engagement, and then you put the differentiators down there that we've built of how to really kind of get talent and make it proficient and deliver, it turns into a very unique delivery platform that can kind of go across many different functional areas. The offering, as Rich offered it right now, we started in the finance and accounting space, and as Rich outlined, like I said on the previous slide, that we think it's a powerful platform. So we have companies or in discussions with other companies on items or processes that are very specific to their company, but they feel that this platform would serve them well, that we would, in essence, build service excellence into a process that might be very unique to their industry. The other item I'd add here is RPA. So we've grown out experience in the RPA space, and some of our clients actually start with an RPA engagement, and then we migrate into more of a BPO relationship. So like any BPO provider, we have kind of roadmaps of kind of where we are and where we want to be. This demonstrates kind of into the far left, very typical BPO nomenclature of kind of rate cards, transaction center. We aspire to be a business process transformation center, so BPaaS as a service. We think of the model in the future being not just all about labor, but being about labor, analytics, and robotics. So the relationship is, and the contractual instruments have to shift with that over time to yield that innovation. The other slice I'd offer there is that virtual spouse network. So one element of working with spouses is they, like I said, the permanent change of station. So when they get PCS, they're allowed to take their work with them. In a controlled environment, they take their work with them. So we've already got about 11% of our staff working virtually just through PCS. So they've moved on to other bases around the world and working on the AOL account and other accounts. So over time, we see our footprint of Liberty Source growing as we grow out this virtual spouse or remote spouse network. The entry points, like I stated before, finance and accounting is an entry point, a typical BPO entry point. The platform solutions is really where customers are looking at maybe processes that are very unique to them, but then leveraging that platform of things that we've built over time that can allow them to, run things as a managed service, bundle it up as a managed service, and run it as a managed service. And then the other entry point is in that RPA space that I mentioned before. The next slide is just kind of indicative of kind of where we see things going on the roadmap over time. We do believe we have discussions with SaaS providers pretty regularly as we start to build affiliations with them over time. And the finance and accounting space is pretty well built out, and then we'll continue to build out platform areas and RPA areas, and then look into HR and customer care. So lastly, the last slide kind of just wraps it all together of just kind of what what we believe we're all about. It's a partnership, an outsourcing partnership people can be proud of, and we build service excellence into our clients' processes. The service offering, where we're located, obviously the location today, and then as we grow the global footprint of spouses around the world. And the various ways to get and leverage the platform. So with that, I'm going to, Rich and I'll kind of go through the scar tissue that we've assembled on this journey. And first off, I'd like to say, goes without saying, hats off to the AOL leadership team for committing their time and their excellence and their commitment to Liberty Source to go on this journey with us and to really connect that dot between CSR and a real they have a commercial need, and they had a CSR element, and really connecting those two to really to get a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of equation. So, but we've learned much, and very open and collaborative environment, and sometimes Rich is almost shockingly too candid at times, but I would say, first off, it would say too much scope too fast. So 16 process areas in 120 days across so many different domains. It wasn't so much the number of people, it was the number of processes. So being proficient on 16 different areas so quickly was a tough equation.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, we did it for really a business risk mitigation reason, but it was aggressive, and we made it through. But I would have loved to have had either a little more time or time to cook each of the functions before we moved to another one.
Yeah. And then measurements matter. Obviously, the measurements had been done offshore for 8 years, and we inherited many of them. I think we would have liked to kind of look under those calculations a bit more before we immediately just adopted them and replicated them in Liberty Source. And we've begun to tune them and modify them and improve them where needed. Proficiency. Early on in the training modules, we did a lot of end-to-end thinking training, because we knew that inheriting great end-to-end processes like we have at AOL, the value prop is really connecting the dots between the different functional areas. And so, but what we found is that people were really hyper-focused on just learning their job first before they could actually gain enough kind of brain power to kind of really think end-to-end. So we've since changed that sequencing. So really getting proficient in job is number one, and then we roll into end-to-end thinking and project design after that. Robotics, prior to migration, we just weren't in a position due to timing to really look at robotics, and also AOL, their ERP systems were under a lot of change at the time. And in 2016, we're reopening that book with AOL to look at robotics opportunities at AOL.
So let me take plans for a bench. This one's very interesting. I think that the economics of our deal, and we held LibertySource very close to here's the cost we could do. It had to really be cost neutral, and that I'm sure that was the major contributor for the lack of really a bench team. And I would say going forward, we should have allowed maybe a little bit more in terms of the finances to have a slightly larger bench size to handle things like you mentioned here, coverage, unplanned project work. And that should have been done. It wasn't. We made it through, but definitely a lessons learned.
You've heard us say collaborative like probably 100 times on this call. It isn't just a word. It is really how we've been interacting. But at times, I think it's hurt both parties because we have maybe skipped over some more permanent formal checks or sign-offs that might be typically ingrained in a BPO customer relationship. So we've gone back and kind of ticked off a few of those items, but I would say the collaboration kind of get ahead of us a little bit, and it prevented some of that healthy discussion that surfaces real issues. Those checkpoints are there for a reason. Client engagement to a point. There was a time where, and this was AOL's suggestion, they inserted kind of a legal reminder at times that following the transition, that co-employment law and things of that nature, that really LibertySource needed to own the work, and we do own the work, but we approached it was an approach we took to kind of remind the AOLers to kind of hold the LibertySource managers accountable, and that's where it kind of gets to shifting that discussion from like how work is happening and who is doing the work to kind of what is delivered to me when, what's the deliverable. And so we needed a little bit of nudge that I think was really helpful to kind of formalize that line in the sand. So with that, anything else to add, Rich, on that? Okay, so with that, I'll hand it back to Susie.
That's great. Many thanks indeed, Steve and Rich. So just before we go into Q&A, do make sure that you've posted me your question. I'd just like to launch the fourth and final poll, please, of the day. So coming up on your screen now, just before we go into Q&A. There's been quite a lot of talk in today's webinar about RPA, and obviously a reference there about AOL looking to deploy RPA in 2016. What is your level of interest in robotics today? We are live with robotics in shared services. We are looking at implementing robotics in shared services. I'm curious where robotics can help us within shared services, or I'm not necessarily interested in robotics right now. So please just tell us a little bit more about your view of robotics and where you are in your thinking as far as the implementation of robotics. If we can see if we can nudge it past 50%, closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a little bit of a look at the breakdown there coming up on your screen now. So we have 44% of you saying that you are actually curious in finding out where robotics can help you in shared services. And following in second position, 31% of you saying that we are looking at implementing robotics within shared services. 13% of you say that you're live with robotics in shared services today. 13% of you are not interested in robotics just yet. So I think that really suggests that there's a big appetite for RPA, with really 87% of you, if you do the math on that, 87% of you either saying that you're live or you've got an interest in applying robotics today. Right, thank you for that. Now let's move through to your questions. So first question, which I'll put to you, Steve, and then maybe we can put the same question to Rich. You mentioned 11% of your workforce work virtually. What are the challenges that come with a model like that for first of all you, Steve, and the outsourcing organization, and then potentially for the client?
Good question. So first and foremost, it's a privilege to work remotely, so people or work needs to meet a certain criteria to go remote. So first off, it has to meet a criteria that there's already set measurements on it. We have tool sets that can support it remotely, and in essence, it's stabilized. And then obviously the client is comfortable with the work being remote. And so when those criteria are checked off, now there's normal kind of work from home kind of models that we go through. That there's sign-offs to make sure there's child care and others, and that would go kind of with any kind of work remote kind of situation. So there's a set process we go to, but processes and both processes and people kind of earn, it's a privilege to work remotely, and they need to earn that. And so both the process and the person need to go through those checklists in order to work remotely. And then there's, it's a set schedule on when SLAs are responsive, and if you measure it enough, you don't really need to watch the work every day. So, Rich?
Yeah. So from a client perspective, a couple thoughts. One, I'm agnostic to where the work is being done. Again, within security's met, and they've got the things they need at home. So from a client perspective, we really don't care that it's a remote person versus a on-site person. Secondly, it does help us in the sense that, one, attrition is lower because we don't have to let that person off the account, or Steve doesn't. And so it keeps that, good people on the account, which is really good for us from a retraining perspective, proficiency. And then finally, it also helps with things like time zone coverage. So some of the remote actually may not be a PCS or a change in base structure, but it may be that we need to work them a little, they need to work a little bit later to cover a time zone that's a global requirement. So for us, it's worked out just fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. That's good to know. Now, there was reference to the lessons learned, and one of the lessons learned being that perhaps it was a bit ambitious to go for, I believe it was 16 processes over a 4-month period. In your opinion, what would have been the kind of the reasonable number to go for?
Well, I think if it's 5 or so processes, and at that point, number of people is maybe a gating factor, because we have access to, I think we have a good large talent pool already established. It's really the number of 5 processes would be kind of a little bit more easily to handle. We've been talking to clients in bundles of 50 resources, or even a little bit smaller, across 1 to 5 process areas. And you're still going to get the speed. I think you're still going to get into that, that 3 months, whatever. But we taxed the 4-month window with 16.
From my perspective, so I was the transition manager from the AOL side. If we could have done it by domain, is what I would have liked to have seen. So, for instance, all the procure to pay work goes as a set of functions, and then maybe all the order to cash, followed by the traditional accounting work. That would have been better, but again, we had some risk mitigation we needed with our current provider, and we need to really short-circuit some of that in order to stay functional.
Mm-hmm. Okay, a question for you, Rich. Did your offshore vendor that you were with originally or prior offer an onshore solution, and did you look at this as a possibility as well?
They did. They're a global provider, and they did have certainly onshore or other delivery centers all over the globe. But what they did not have really was that social responsibility piece. So we really wanted to get a local, more of a local presence with the CSR add-on and make that work. And if we could find somebody that could do the work and also meet our other financial goals, our local time zone, things like that, then we wanted to make that work. But yes, they could have, the existing provider could have ultimately done the work, but maybe without all the other pieces and tangibles we wanted as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as the knowledge transfer was concerned, and really there was kind of 3 parties at play here with the AOL team, the Liberty Source team, and then the previous BPO team. How were those three parties managed, in particular with the knowledge transfer period that you highlighted there in your migration map? So probably a question for you, Steve, and then maybe we can bring in Rich.
Yeah, we definitely took the cue from AOL. So AOL would, it was very cordial. It was all done over kind of a video conference and phone calls. And so I think there was a whole messaging strategy into on the previous BPO provider's side. And so we worked on, AOL would be a part of it. So they kind of refereed the exchange, and they were, we just had discussions and feedback sessions, and so we would get the information, digest it, come back with questions. We were doing processing in some cases at the same time to test that the desk procedures were actually up to date. That was kind of our biggest checkpoint. And so if there were things that we were seeing in the procedures that didn't equal what was going on online, there was formal exchange mechanisms where we would go back to the previous BPO and ask questions, so we could kind of pencil in notes on the desk procedures. Rich?
Yeah, and I'd say just from a governance structure, we had an AOL lead on our side. LiveResource provided a transition lead, and then also we worked closely with a BPO provider's lead. And so just the three leads worked together in terms of what that transition period and knowledge transfer looked like, and it was fine. I mean, we worked it out from a business perspective. I mean, ultimately it comes down to its business.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Now, not wanting to go into the commercials between the two parties, but it would be good just to touch on a little bit about the comparison of the cost for AOL roughly between what you are benefiting from now to what you were kind of paying from a cost perspective previously. Are you pretty much looking at there to be like an even balance between the two organizations, or are you feeling that you're paying a little bit more for the service now, or a little bit less? How does that work?
So I think Rich has mentioned a couple of times it's cost neutral. As far as working, I'll let Rich voice over a little bit on this one, but we went in with the commercials being, we needed to be cost neutral. So how did LiveResource kind of meet those aggressive targets to deliver the work back home? Well, I think, I guess we have some math on this. We're doing it with less of a footprint. We talked about a very transparent, flat organization. So there's not a lot of handlers between the delivery mechanism and the client. And so we also have kind of a smaller bench. And I'm just going to assume that if the offshore provider had a significant amount of attrition, they probably had a large bench, and they probably had a lot of folks in between the delivery organization and the client. And so we found we could do the work actually with less people back here and make that be the same price to the customer at the end of the day. So that's how we got the economics to work on our delivery side.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that we're still very, we have a very strong view on the economics even today. I mean, we're very mindful of what an extra head costs, and do we need that, and can there be some efficiencies in other areas moving around the team? So
there would be times where I wish the CSR element had a little bit of a stronger edge, but no, they're very, very commercial when it comes to the contract, that's for sure. So.
A final question, and I'll put this through to Rich, if I may. So from your internal customer experience, so your business units, what has the response been to the switchover, and did they feel any bumps in the road during the migration period?
Okay, yeah, great question. From a client perspective, obviously the last year has been tough. We migrated from a relationship, an India provider that we'd worked with for 8 or 9 years. So it was a very smooth, well-running, mature organization and set of processes. So there was definitely bumps in the road. It had to do a lot with just changing to a new provider. It had to do with the fact that we migrated so many functions so quickly. And so we're working through that. The first year of any of these relationships is difficult. And I would say some of the things, though, that have helped is just that transparency, working well together with our partner at Liberty Source, and being able to be so close to it. Now, I think over time, as we do mature and get better and go beyond green, as Steve alluded to, I think we'll actually be able to step back a little bit more and look at that relationship as more of an outcome-based, and not have to really think about some of those things. But there's definitely been some bumps. During the migration, there was bumps as we took ownership away from our current BPO and then moved it to Liberty Source, and then obviously as we began to start trusting a new partner.
Okay, good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that really does bring us to a close. If you'd like to get in contact with Steve, his email address is presented there on the slide, so feel free to contact him directly should you have any questions. We have a number of webinars coming up that really should be in your diary, so do make sure that you are in attendance for the next 3 webinars that we've got in our schedule, and also the events that we've got coming up too on dynamic discounting in Scottsdale in February, and the Shared Services Leaders Summit taking place in March in London. Many thanks to our 2 guest speakers today. We look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you and goodbye.